All right, next up from 1975 is the MGM-UA letterbox release of The Wind and the Lion. Really nice looking jacket, even though it's in the typical MGM style of giving a sort of airbrush look to publicity stills. It looks really nice, and I like the stylized title font. Pretty classy looking for a title like this. Nice gatefold. I do like that they tried to give it a different design by having the sort of, I guess you'd say, Moorish looking design on the sides. And there, I guess, is the whole rendering of the front image. Here's the other panel. Really nice usage of stills. Again, much better than you'd usually get from a MGM-UA gatefold at this time. The film is spread on 3 sides and does include the original trailer. It's, of course, letterboxed with a Dolby Surround encoded stereo track. Show you the rear. Of course, this looks much more common to what a typical disc from the studio would look like. The gold bar across the top on the back is maintained. Pretty much just a really nice letterbox transfer. And again, the first time you can actually watch the film properly, you know, letterboxed in widescreen. And of course, it's come out on DVD, and now it's available on Blu-ray as well. So this is really more for, you know, people who want the film on Laserdisc. But a really good forgotten film, and one of the few John Milius films that I really, really like. I've heard of this film, but I've never seen it. This is the Vidmark release of the 1976 Western, The Longest Drive. Like I said, I've heard of this. I've never seen it, so I'll have to give this a watch. Apparently, this is a very uncommon Laserdisc. Apparently, it was made in very limited quantities because the LDB listing for it is much more than a common disc is going to be. Of course, I do believe this is a 133 transfer, so I guess it is panned and scanned. But the cover's nice, and this is still in the shrink. And it does have a digital soundtrack, which I presume would be mono. I haven't got to check this one out yet, but I'm pretty sure this would be a mono soundtrack. So, you know, a nice looking Laserdisc that's actually apparently pretty rare and difficult to find. So I'll have to check this out, although I guess you'd have to try and... I guess this has come out on DVD. I'm not for certain. But if it did, I'm sure, I would hope it was in widescreen. Although sometimes old masters would get reused, and even the hard-to-find DVD versions are 133 as well. So it just depends. But yeah, so I'll have to check this out. And again, not a common release apparently, so to give that a spin. Next up is the 1976 release Swashbuckler, a universal letterbox edition. Really nice imagery. The jacket blends well. Everything has a red tone to it, so it really kind of works. Although I must say that the background, the fact that it's you know, water on the horizon, the great seas on a universal jacket, I see this and the first thing I think of is, heck, Robert Shaw was in a version of Waterworld in the 70s. Wow, that sounds fantastic. Anyway, but it is a fun little film, and I love Robert Shaw in anything. And of course, this is one of his last films, so I do highly recommend it for Robert Shaw fans or people like myself who are fans of classic adventure films, especially films set on the high seas. And you know, it's just a whole lot of fun. Now, in terms of the Laserdisc, it's just a single movie-only disc. It does include the original trailer, which is a nice touch, and has a digital, I believe it's mono track. So again, just a simple movie-only release, and I think this made it to DVD, but I think it's still the same old transfer. But the transfer on this looks pretty good. I kind of checked it out. I've been meaning to rewatch this anyway, so this gives me a good excuse. Next up is another release in the Paramount Great American Writers series. This is the 1977 adaptation of The Last Tycoon, based on the unfinished F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. I haven't seen this in a very long time. I think I saw it at far too young of an age to really comprehend the whole thing. But in the past couple years, I finally did read the unfinished novel, so I was kind of wanting to actually go and look at this anyway. Again, like some of the others that I have and have gone over, they went for a cover that's, you know, designed to look like a book. This one has a blue spine printed on it, whereas some of the others have green ones. And then you have a photo still picture. Although this cover design looks more like a photo album than an actual great novel or anything, but you know, I won't begrudge them that. At least they were trying something different. And the rear carries on with that design. Unfortunately, this is apparently a 133 transfer instead of being letterboxed, but I think this film was shot in flat instead of scope anyway, so of course it could always just be open matted. But anyway, it does have a digital track, which again I believe should be mono on this title, and I think this did get a DVD release, and I don't think it's hit Blu-ray anywhere, but still just an interesting film. And it was directed by Elia Kazan, and you have De Niro and Robert Mitchum and a fantastic cast trying to, you know, do what they can with the unfinished Fitzgerald work. And from what I remember, it's pretty good, so I'll have to spin this up and check it out again. Now next up is another Paramount release. This one is pretty hard to find. This is their letterbox reissue of Days of Heaven, the Terrence Malick film, and it has an AC3 track added to it. Really nice cover artwork. You know, it's pretty straightforward, but it does look pretty nice when you hold it in front of you on a Laserdisc jacket. At first glance, it doesn't seem all that impressive, but it really does work, and it fits the film's tone very well. Now, it's just a simple movie-only transfer. There's no trailer, no special features or anything. So the real benefit you're getting out of this was having a brand new transfer, finally letterboxed for the first time, and the fact that they added a AC3 5.1 track. So you get the Dolby Stereo PCM, which would have the Dolby Surround encoding on it, and you get an AC3 rendering. Of course, the film is available now from Criterion in a beautiful HD restoration, but if you're interested in the film on Laserdisc, or you want the best available Laserdisc, this is the one you'll have to go for. But as I said, it's not very easy to find, it's pretty uncommon, and can get relatively pricey. It's not a late release, because this disc is from '96, but it's one of those Paramount reissues where they made a new transfer, and apparently they just didn't press a whole lot of them, or people didn't get rid of them. So you'll have to spend a lot of time to track this one down. Next up, another in the Great American Writers series from Paramount. This is the 1979 film Islands in the Stream. This one actually is in widescreen, as noted here on the top banner, and has a digital track, which I haven't spun this up yet, so I don't know if it's mono or stereo. Although this being 1979, you still had films that kind of went back and forth. A lot of people stuck with mono for as long as they could, simply for budgetary reasons. But anyway, it ties in with the others in this series, and it's a nice older release from Paramount, and at least they were getting these films out there. I don't think there's a whole lot of them. I think it's maybe 5 or 10 in this Writers series. I may be wrong, of course. But at least they were finding reasons to get deeper catalog titles out. So I'll have to check this one out. The next up is another Paramount widescreen reissue. This is one of their remastered widescreen discs they started putting out in 96, 97, 98. This is the remastered widescreen version of Urban Cowboy. Not too easy to find. I don't think any of these remastered widescreen discs they did were really done in a lot of big quantities. Even the Jack Ryan remastered widescreen titles can be difficult to find a lot of times. I picked this one up locally for very cheap, so it's a little dinged up, but for the price I paid, which was about $0.25, I don't mind. The cover image is pretty nice, and again, I think this was pretty much the one sheet poster for this film, or at least one of them. And the reason why it's kind of soft looking is because it's just a section of a larger picture, but I don't mind that. It looks pretty nice in a Laserdisc jacket. You do get a pretty nice gatefold. Looks like they tried to make it look like a cork pinboard on a wall with stills from the film, so I give them an A for effort on that, that's for sure. Now here you get your chapter breakdown. The film is spread over 3 sides, and I don't think, no, there's no trailer or anything. Just pretty much giving you a brand new transfer with Dolby Stereo on the PCM tracks, and then a Dolby AC3 5.1 track added as well. The disc is pressed by Pioneer, so it should be really nice in terms of quality. I'm going to have to spin this up and check it out for myself. I don't think I've seen this film. Actually, I don't know if I've ever seen it in its entirety, so it'll be a new one for me. And again, I wish it was in better shape, but seeing as these are pretty uncommon and all of the Paramount remasters can look really, really good, I didn't mind since it was only a quarter. Next up is the Fox widescreen edition of The Man from Snowy River. The really interesting kind of late period Western, and again, it's been years since I've seen this, so this gives me good excuse to go back and watch it on this. Uses original artwork, which looks really nice on this jacket. Of course, it's a later pressing, hence the Fox Video logo on the bottom, which means it should be a little bit cleaner than had it come out in the CBS Fox days. Carries a digital soundtrack, which is a stereo surround PCM track, and it's just a movie-only disc, but with a nice bit of liner notes, and I like this sort of off-green color on the back. Anytime they change the colors up on the back, instead of it being that standard Fox light video gray, that makes me happy. So just a nice disc, and again, it's nice that it came out a little bit later, so the pressing quality should be a bit better than an older one. Price stickers, don't wanna come off. Price stickers, who cares how much it cost when you've already bought it? Price stickers. Alright, next up from 1983 is National Lampoon's Vacation. Now, this one you usually find in the older ones, which of course are 133 with analog sound. But this one is differentiated by having the blue border around the fantastic poster artwork. And what that means is, if I'm not mistaken and if I'm remembering this correctly, this version has a digital soundtrack on it. And all the other ones are analog only. And I'm pretty sure it's a Dolby Surround mix, because this film is from '83, and then all the later ones have a 5.1 remix. But I can't remember if this film was originally Dolby Surround or mono. Again, like I said, mono kind of lasted into the, really into the mid-'80s. But I remember on this film, it got remixed into 5.1, and to get the original track, you have to go back to this specific release. All the other ones and the earlier ones will just give you analog audio. So if you're looking for a copy of this film, you'll want to seek this one out. It has the standard rear Warner Brothers jacket, but it looks pretty nice. Again, anytime they change the colors up, that makes me happy, because I get tired of the same thing over and over. Just a simple movie-only disc, 2 sides, but again, I do believe this is still 133, so it's a bit opened up, but I don't know for sure if it's a real open matte transfer or not. Still, I do wish they had just printed this across the whole Laserdisc jacket, but again, it's really nice that they at least kept it and finally added digital sound. Alright, next up is the 1984 film Amadeus. This is the original Laserdisc issue, which is 133, unfortunately, and I do believe it's a pan and scan job, but it does have a Dolby Surround encoded digital soundtrack. Now, this is the theatrical cut, which nowadays you can't see this version anymore. You can only see the director's cut, which myself and a lot of other people have some issues with. The theatrical cut really runs a lot better. A lot of the stuff that was put in, taken out, and moved around in the director's cut is really unnecessary. But they've pretty much replaced the theatrical cut with the director's cut. So there's a Pioneer Special Edition where they made a new master, and it is the theatrical version. It was done about '95 or so. You can get it as a standalone or in a box set with a bunch of nice extras. I hope to get that box set one day. That's what I'm holding out for. It does add an AC3 5.1 track as well, but I do believe they had newly remastered the soundtrack. So I picked this up because you can get this release for literally dirt cheap, simply so that I could have this to compare to the Pioneer Special Edition version when I eventually find that. So again, this is the theatrical cut. It's the cheapest and easiest way to see it, but of course you have to deal with it being panda scanned. So I really wouldn't recommend that. I'd say just go ahead and get the Pioneer Special Edition version. And then, if I'm remembering correctly, the very first DVD was pretty much a port of that Laserdisc, and I think it's really early. It's like a snapper case. I think it's double-sided. It's like a really crummy DVD. But I think that's also the theatrical cut, and that was the last time the theatrical version was released on home video. So if you've never seen the film, give it a shot. And if you've only seen the director's cut, try and see the theatrical version, because I think it runs a lot better. Next up is Greystoke, Legend of Tarzan. Not a super common Laserdisc, but not a really hard to find one or anything. This is actually the first widescreen version. The earlier ones were pan scanned. And of course, this being Warner Brothers, you wouldn't know it from the front of the jacket, and it's 2 discs shoved in flimsy cardboard. So thankfully this is not creased or anything, because I think the white background would make it look more obvious. This pretty much replicates some of the major poster design, and all the other versions carry on with this artwork. So it looks really nice on a Laserdisc jacket. Let me show you the rear. It's the standard Warner's rear, but it looks pretty nice. Again, this is letterboxed. It has a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track with the film's original mix. It's just the film only, spread across 3 sides, and it's really an interesting film. I think it got a lot of flack at the time, but it tries to do more of the Tarzan mythos that really gets left out, because people just think of the MGM Johnny Weissmuller films as a stereotype, and don't even look at those films properly. So it was nice to revisit this, and of course now it's out on a really nice looking Blu-ray from Warner Archive. So if you want to see the film, I'd say go check that out first, but if you're interested to see the Laserdisc or come across it in the bins, you'll want to find this widescreen version. Next up is the Fox release of Romancing the Stone. This is the special widescreen edition, using the gorgeous original poster artwork. It looks really nice on a Laserdisc jacket. Of course, this is a bit early, so it's a CBS Fox pressing, letterboxed with a nice gatefold. It's only 1 disc, but they felt the need to give it a gatefold. And the stills are really nice. Like a lot of these Fox discs, you have this kind of garish single color background, but it really looks nice on this one, because I guess the green was chosen to suggest the jungle, and all of these stills in these Fox discs are printed very nicely. And you get some typical basically just blurbs about the stars of the movie, so basically kind of PR text, but you know, it was nice when people would actually put something on these, so I'll give them that. And again, I guess they just felt like giving this a gatefold, even though it's just a single disc title and didn't exactly need one. Now the rear with the standard Fox layout and gray background. Again, just a movie-only disc. It does include the trailer at the end, but I believe, yeah, it's the trailer for Jewel of the Nile, which is the film's sequel. Fox was actually pretty big on that. There's a number of Fox discs that have either both the film's trailer and its sequel trailer, or just the sequel trailer. So, for example, their release of License to Kill has both the License to Kill teaser trailer and the teaser trailer for The Living Daylights. So that's nice that they put that on there. And there's also a letterbox version of the sequel out there, but it's a lot harder to find. So again, if you're looking for this film on Laserdisc, this is the one you're going to go for. I don't think they did a reissue pressing of it. Of course, it's much easier to find on DVD and such, but nice to have the Laserdisc version just to compare and check out the film's original Dolby Surround soundtrack. Next up, from 1985, this is the letterboxed edition of My Beautiful Laundrette. This one is from LumaVision, apparently, and is not very common. I think there's some earlier, like, pan and scan versions before this, but this letterbox release isn't super available. But it's a nice film to go back to every once in a while. It's an early Stephen Frears film, early Daniel Day-Lewis, so with those two names, you kind of know what you're going into. But it's nicely put together in terms of the packaging and the jacket. And I haven't seen this film in a good number of years, so I'll have to revisit it on this. Of course, it has a digital mono soundtrack, and it does include the original trailer at the end. Otherwise, those are the big special features. Of course, I love the fact that they've listed as a special feature well, I guess by saying it's a digital widescreen transfer, that it's a new digital master, but it always cracks me up when the film, being in its original aspect ratio, is listed as a special feature. This ratio is 1:6:6, so at least it's properly transferred, and that means somebody obviously paid attention to making sure it looked correct for back in the day. So as far as I can tell, this should be the first really decent release of this film, but of course there are other versions now with a lot more in terms of special features and such. Next up is a really interesting film on an MGM UA letterbox release. This is their version of Year of the Dragon, using original poster artwork, which looks really nice on a Laserdisc jacket. It's got a little bit of wear to it, but it looks pretty nice. And like I said before, this is a really interesting film. It's not perfect, but it's got some really striking moments, as pretty much any film that Michael Cimino made. See the gatefold, which, although it's got MGM's tinted stills, it's a really nice gatefold. And in fact, I wish they had just used the background image without anything over it in color. You could pick a number of images from this film, and as you can see, they've picked some other really good stills. But there's a number of images here that could easily make a fantastic gatefold. But for a typical MGM one, it looks really nice. The film's spread across 3 sides and does include the original trailer, but that's it in terms of extras. Now, the soundtrack is Dolby Surround encoded PCM, which would be what you would have heard on the 35mm version, which came out in Dolby Stereo. It did get a 70mm blow-up with a Dolby 6-track mix, so that should be the source of the 5.1 tracks on DVD and Blu-ray. I did get the chance to see a 35mm print of this about a year ago, and it was absolutely fantastic. So this Laserdisc replicates that very, very well. Of course, it's out on DVD with a great commentary track, and then it's been out on Blu-ray for about a year or so over in Europe, in a couple of different editions. It has some different extras, and the transfer looks pretty good, but it didn't have the commentary. Warner Archive just announced they're going to do a Blu-ray version this year. It will have the commentary. It won't have all the extras of the European versions, but it's supposed to be a brand new master made this year in 2019. So that'll be really interesting, and that should be the probably the new best version on video once that comes out, I think in about a month or two. But if you want the film on Laserdisc, this is the one you want to go for. The earlier ones were pan and scan. This one was the first letterbox transfer, and this is one where you really need to see the film in its original aspect ratio. Just a really nice Laserdisc, and of a really interesting film. Again, not perfect, but really, really interesting. And I do definitely recommend it if you've never seen it. Next up, from 1986, is the widescreen remaster of Crocodile Dundee from Paramount. Again, using original poster artwork on a white background. I must say it looks pretty nice with the black Paramount widescreen banner across the top. Unfortunately, it's got some old sticker residue that kept the other sticker on it, so I can't get that quite off yet. But this is not too common of a disc. I think a lot of people try to find this one as well, so that usually kind of makes it a little bit more expensive when you try to find it online. Much more often you'll come across the sequel or the earlier pan and scan versions. So if you're wanting the film on Laserdisc, this is the version you're going to want to go for. Has a Dolby Surround encoded digital track, and in terms of the movie, it's just a movie only, single disc, 2 sides, and yeah, it doesn't include any trailers or anything. So just Paramount getting out a film properly in widescreen with digital sound. So pretty much when you come across these, if you're even interested in the film, that's going to be the one you're going to want to go for, because all the others are going to most likely be pan and scan or analog only discs. Now next up is a 1988 film. I don't know, I think this may have originally shown on television. This is The 10th Man with Anthony Hopkins. It's based on a Graham Greene novel. So I've never seen this before, but just those 2 names alone mean it's a must watch for me. It's an MGM UA release, and with a digital soundtrack. Again, it's I think this was originally, I think it may have been made for television, I'm not sure. So that would explain why this is a 133 transfer, probably shot on film, intended for television. No special features or anything, and it's got a digital track. I haven't run this yet. I don't know if it's mono or stereo. But again, this was just a blind buy for me because I was just really interested, and I'm a huge Graham Greene fan. So just a nice looking little MGM release. From 1989, here's the Warner release of Tango and Cash. Very nicely using original artwork, actually using the whole of the jacket without using a bunch of logos or other crap. So A+ for effort on that. It's a single disc, so the jacket's in good shape, and the rear looks pretty nice with the usual black and silver. It's actually widescreen. It's actually noted on there, which is great. It has a Dolby Surround track, but that's the one problem. For some reason, this only has analog audio. It does not have a digital soundtrack, which why they did that, I don't know, because if once you get used to having digital soundtracks in this era, they still did a number of discs, Warner especially, where they were just analog tracks. So it's still the original Dolby Surround mix, but it's on the analog tracks because for some reason they just felt like, you know what, screw you, you don't need the digital track on this one. But anyway, outside of that, I spun this up for a minute to check it out, and it looks and sounds really nice. Pretty much like what you would expect for a Warner disc of this era. Kind of like what you'd see on Lethal Weapon 2, for example. But unfortunately, it doesn't have a digital track, so that's the only downside of this one. Next up is the letterbox reissue of the film Awakenings. The older 133 issue is the one I had before, and this is really just an upgrade. This one is much less common than the other, even though it uses pretty much very similar disc art, so it's very easy to confuse the two. And it is a Columbia issue, although I don't think this has any rot issues, but of course that always can be the case with one of these. I do prefer the jacket on this one. This is really kind of dinged up a little bit. I just picked this up as an upgrade because I hadn't realized the older one was 133 when I originally picked it up. It's an underrated little film that, you know, is nice to go back to every once in a while, and if you want it on Laserdisc, this is the edition to go for since it is letterboxed, unless you're a big 133 transfer kind of person. Has pretty much the same sounding Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, and outside of that, it's just a movie-only disc. It's just a widescreen reissue with a nice bit of liner notes on the back. And, you know, it looks a little bit nicer than your common Columbia release, so it was nice to see this get a little bit spiffed up reissue with widescreen being the selling feature. So if you're wanting this film on disc, you'll be going for this one. Next up is one I tried to get for a long while. This is the CAV version of Dick Tracy, the really interesting, if you know, not perfect 1990 adaptation of the famous comic strip character. Gorgeous jacket using the original one-sheet artwork. It's kind of glossy in its printing, so it's a bit higher end than the typical Disney Touchstone release. Of course, this is a Disney film, so it's pretty much their standard style of jacket artwork. You differentiate the CAV versions by this little gold triangle up here stating CAV. And it is a 133 transfer though, so it is opened up from the original shooting. And I must say it looks quite nice. It is a really nice matting and very carefully done to be perfectly framed on CRTs of the era. But of course the film was originally designed for widescreen and plays better that way. What's really interesting to note is that all of the effect shots, especially the cityscapes, which were beautifully done to mimic a sort of hand-etched comic art style, are also rendered in 133 on this perfectly. So the film must have been designed with that in mind, to be protected for 133 back then. So you don't lose anything in terms of image, and it plays very well. It has a Dolby Surround encoded digital soundtrack. Of course, this film was one of the handful of titles that was released in the CDS format, and really this and those handful of other films are really what are the foundation of what became then, a few years later, the modern current 5.1 standard. So when you listen to this soundtrack, you can tell a lot of discrete effects are going on, especially if you hear it in 5.1 on DVD or Blu-ray. That was supposedly taken from the original CDS stems, but that being said, you can still hear that on this Dolby Surround mix, and it is very punchy. It is a really nice Dolby Surround track when the effects kick in, or during the song and dance numbers, for example. So it sounds excellent. It looks excellent. The transfer on this is outstanding and is really going to show off, you know, the either the pluses or minuses of your particular setup. If your player does not handle chroma noise and such very well, this can look very noisy. But if you have a really good player which outputs a really nice clear signal, then this will look fantastic. Same goes for your processing equipment and or your television or display device, projector, whatever your setup is. So basically this very easily can be a test setup disc for various players and setup equipment in both the picture transfer, making sure your color looks right and your detail, and also the soundtrack is excellent, so you could use it if you ever needed to test out your Dolby Surround decoding. But excellent disc, no real special features, pretty much the standard style of Disney packaging with the same type of layout as other Disney Touchstone discs, but it looks quite nice, and was pretty much reused for the tape release. I think the tape release had roughly this same back, and it's kind of funny. It's very similar to how they packaged and sold the 1989 Batman film when it arrived on tape and Laserdisc. So that was this film's biggest influence, obviously, right down to the Danny Elfman score that sounds pretty similar in a lot of places. But anyway, excellent Laserdisc. If you're wanting this film, definitely hold out for the CAV version, but just be forewarned, it is 133, and also if you don't have the best player in the world, then this may not really look all that great, but it does with a really good setup. Now here we go with another 133 transfer of a film that should have been letterboxed. This is the Fox release of Edward Scissorhands. Lovely looking jacket. I think this is pretty much, in terms of artwork, this exact design I think is roughly exclusive to the Laserdisc jacket. Unfortunately, they did not release this in widescreen. Why, I don't know. So you don't get the Fox banner across the top, but you get the lovely Fox information on the bottom, but without a colored bar or a black or gray bar, so that is nice. But just keep in mind, this is 133 from the original 185. It plays fine, and is how many people, myself included, you know, used to see this film on broadcast and VHS and such. But again, this is one where I wish they would have made a widescreen version. They just didn't. It has a digital soundtrack with a Dolby Surround encoding on it. However, I believe this was also another one of the titles that was released with CDS decoding, and would be played back in the CDS system. But I think on this particular film, the soundtrack master itself was only 4.0. So even though it had the ability to play back in 5.1 in full PCM while using the CDS system, it was only a 4.0 mix to begin with. So all the later 5.1 tracks are probably remixes on the various DVDs and Blu-rays. It's got a pretty nice jacket in terms of the artwork. You know, it really fits with the tone of the film, and this being the suburbia, extremely brightly colored landscape that young Edward finds himself in. So it fits very, very well. It looks nice. Unfortunately, there's no special features, just a single CLB disc. And again, the transfer and sound is pretty great. I just wish it was widescreen. Next up is the letterbox release of Flatliners, also from Columbia. Nice looking artwork, pretty much using the original one sheet. Looks very nice on a black background. Pretty straightforward, and for some reason I think there's like 2 different issues of this. I think they have pretty similar catalog numbers. It's just when you look up the film on the Laserdisc database, it pops up with 2 or 3 different versions. I'm not sure what the differences are, and it may be that this got an AC3 reissue late in the game, but I don't know if that's I don't know about that for sure. But anyway, it's a pretty nice looking jacket. Simple, straightforward, but really, really looks nice. Of course, it's letterboxed with a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, so that'll give you the film's original mix. And outside of that, it's just a simple movie-only disc, and you can pick it up for pretty cheap. Now here's one of the super common Laserdiscs you'll see everywhere and find in most every bin. Of course, talking about the Paramount letterbox release of Ghost, which looks gorgeous using the original poster artwork and the typical Paramount widescreen banner. But like I said, they must have printed up a whole bunch of these because this is a very common title. So don't pay very much for it because it's really not worth a whole lot. You find them in practically every bin you come across. It's a pretty nice gatefold, and the usual Paramount style at this time of just using imagery across the gatefold, usually a long photo like this, side ones, but they're printed very, very nicely. The color's excellent, and it's sort of like a flat gloss on the jacket, so they come across really, really well. But of course, if you've seen any Paramount release from this era, you kind of know what to expect. And here we are with the rear and the standard design they were using at the time. Again, I like how they went with a green background on the back to kind of match the front. Again, pretty much a standard Paramount release for this time period. You get a nice letterbox transfer with the Dolby Surround encoded PCM track with the film's original mix. And yeah, outside of that, no special features, but just a really nice, simple release of a very commonly found Laserdisc that pretty much everybody probably has at this point if they're watching any of these videos. Or has probably owned a whole bunch for buying lots. Next up is the letterbox release of Memphis Belle from Warner Brothers, and for once they did not crowd the entire front with a bunch of logos. Doesn't even have the Laserdisc logo on it, so very, very nice. And unfortunately, there is an AC3 reissue of this that looks pretty much identical, so it can be very difficult to find that one if you're looking for it. This is the standard Dolby Surround PCM track original widescreen pressing from about 91 or so in the standard Warner Brothers style. No special features, but a much nicer looking jacket and release than what Warner Brothers usually would do. And it just works really, really well. Just if you're interested in the AC3 version, you'll have to be very stringent about checking the jackets for the catalog number, because otherwise you'll probably wind up buying another copy of this. Now here we go with another Fox disc that seems to be a 133 copy. This is the film Pacific Heights, directed by John Schlesinger. I've never seen this, but I'm a big Keaton fan, so I figured why not. And apparently it is a 133 disc, though. There is no widescreen version on Laserdisc, so that should be known for those of you out there like myself who try to see whatever they can in its proper aspect ratio. So let me flip it over on the back. You get a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track and the typical Fox style jacket with no special features, but at least a little bit of liner notes, and it looks pretty nice for a what would have been a modern release at that time. Next up is the Warner Brothers release of Reversal of Fortune. And again, very nicely presented with only the LD logo on the bottom. Again, Warner Brothers seemed to have finally gotten the idea to, just let the artwork do the talking. Show you the rear. Unfortunately, it doesn't note if this is letterboxed or not, so as a lot of Warner Brothers discs are, sometimes you have to just check the LDTB page or just wait till you put in the disc to see if it's actually in widescreen or not. I've never really seen this film, I don't think. This is just another one I picked up locally for dirt cheap, and I'll have to spin it up and give it a shot. It does have a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, so at least there's that. And I'm guessing this is widescreen, but again, that's only a guess because on some of these Warner discs, you really don't know. I've been after this one for a long while. This is the Letterbox THX Mastered Total Recall reissue disc. Of course, it uses the same artwork as the original release, which also came in a 133 opened up version. This THX Mastered version reissue disc also came in a 133 version, so if you want the widescreen version, you'll have to make sure that you find the one that's actually marked with the widescreen banner across the top. I must say, I really like the artwork. I like the design. It's simple, clean, and very striking, and it's a shame they went away from that for the various DVD and Blu-ray reissues. Show you the back. The rear artwork is pretty nice. Unfortunately, there's no special features. It's just a single CLV disc, movie only. Doesn't even include the trailer, and but it does have the original Dolby Surround mix in PCM. And again, you get the THX stamp of approval for free because nobody really knows what that means other than the fact that it looks fantastic on jacket artwork, and you get the lovely THX logo at the beginning. So in terms of picture and sound, I watched the original disc at some point. I don't own it anymore. The sound on this seems roughly the same, but the picture quality is improved. It seemed a bit sharper than what I remembered the old disc being. And so I would definitely recommend going for this one. They're all dirt cheap because they're very common. It's just sometimes when you go and try to find a particular copy of a certain title, it can just elude you like this did. It's very common to find the 133 disc, especially the older ones. So I would say hold out till you find the THX reissue widescreen version like this. Next up is actually a film that really I don't think is available here in the States. I think it only came out on DVD very briefly. And this is the film Light Sleeper. It's directed by Paul Schrader, who's got a number of films that aren't actually available in his home country anymore. Unfortunately, this is a 133 transfer. If you want to see the film in widescreen, you'll have to go buy the British PAL DVD and have a region-free player. But of course, you have to then deal with the 4% PAL speed up. But in that case, aside from that, you can pick up this Laserdisc if you can find it. It's pretty uncommon, and just watch the film in 133. As I said before, I think this got ported to DVD in the same 1:3 ratio. It was very briefly available, and it was really kind of crummy, and is now also rare and very expensive and such. So I don't know why these films have gone out of print. Another one of his is the film Light of Day, but that's probably due to, I guess, music licensing reasons. But for that one, I think you'd have to go back and find the original VHS release. I think that's about it. So a lot of his back catalog is out of print here in the States, and hopefully that changes at some point. I'll show you the rear. I've never actually gotten to see this film, but with this cast and it being written and directed by Paul Schrader, I had to give it a shot, even though it's 133 instead of 185. But it looks pretty nice for, Laserdisc packaging of this era. It's a live home video release with a digital soundtrack. I don't know if this is Dolby encoded. It doesn't say or have the Dolby logo, but I'm sure it should be the original mix. I don't know if it's mono or just plain stereo, or if it is indeed surround encoded, but I'll have to spin this up and finally see this film. Now here's a very, very interesting film from the early 90s. One of the great sort of early indie hits that maybe some people remember. This is My Own Private Idaho, which is a letterbox release via Image, and I guess through New Line Home Entertainment at the time. It's since passed on to Criterion, so this really isn't necessary, but it popped up in a lot of discs, and I couldn't resist. It's not very common, and I was just curious to check out the transfer and the original soundtrack mix. Beautiful artwork, pretty much replicated from the original one-sheet poster. And I think this artwork looks really great. It suits the film very well. You get a typical widescreen edition banner across the top. Flip over to the rear. Some pretty good liner notes, and the layout works. If it's it's a little simplistic, but it works. And I don't know exactly if the kind of blue and white fits the film exactly, but it works for what it is, and they were nice enough to include both the original trailer and a TV spot. So most of these indie features getting to Laserdisc, really, all they'd get is maybe a halfway decent transfer, and that's it. So at least they wrote some liner notes and gave you the original trailer and such, and it's really better than you remember when you go back and rewatch it. Definitely an interesting film, and of course, if you want to see it in its best version, you can go pick up the Criterion edition, which has a ton of special features. But if you're interested in the Laserdisc version, this is the only one to go for, and it's not very common. Now, this is a common one that I'm sure many people already have, but this is the Warner's release of Out for Justice. And after really finally sitting down and taking a look at Under Siege and a few other things, it made me want to actually go back and actually legitimately watch the handful of earlier Steven Seagal films that are actually halfway decent maybe. And since I'd never really done that, I figured why not try them on Laserdisc. They have really nice, simple, straightforward jackets and are very cheap because they're very common titles. This is a Warner Brothers release and looks really nice. This one's still in the shrink wrap. It is letterboxed, which is actually noted on the back, and it has a Dolby Surround PCM track. So I'm looking forward to spinning this up. I was very impressed with the Laserdisc of Under Siege. The sound is excellent, and the picture was pretty solid, and it's a nice, very cheap common title, so I figured why not try the other handful of Seagal films on Laserdisc. Here's another one that I've always meant to see and picked up on Laserdisc. This is the letterbox pressing of Ricochet. Really nice looking jacket artwork. Pretty straightforward, and it is a Warner Brothers release. Although the rear looks very uncommon. This is actually a sort of cross release between HBO Video and Warner. So I guess HBO designed the rear, I guess, maybe. Because everything else looks like a standard Warner Brothers disc. It's just the movie only. No trailers or anything, but it is letterboxed, and I think there was a time period where the DVDs were either 1:3:3 or a different aspect ratio. So for a while, the only way to see the film properly letterboxed, I think, was this Laserdisc, if I'm remembering the video history correctly. It does have a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, and I'm really looking forward to finally seeing this. So that should be fun. Next up is the Paramount letterbox release of the film Soap Dish. I've never seen this, but again, it was very cheap locally, and the cast and plot ideas seemed interesting enough, so I'm gonna have to watch this. It's just a single CLV disc, movie-only release, but it looks pretty nice. And by this point in time, practically anytime Paramount put something out and it was letterboxed, you were looking at a really nice solid transfer in both picture and sound, especially for modern films on disc. So I'm gonna have to check this one out. Now next up is a pretty uncommon title on Laserdisc. I think you can pretty easily get it on DVD. It is another one of these films in 1:3:3, but I just couldn't resist because I hadn't seen this in a long time. This is the Vidmark release of Deadfall, which nowadays is infamously known as one of, if not the shall we say, cagiest of Nick Cage performances. And of course, if you've never heard of this or seen any internet memes, Cage's expression on the cover should tell you you're in for a ride. From what I remember, it's not a very good film. I think it was one of those. It was directed by Christopher Coppola, and I guess he had some connection, shall we say, and used it to his full advantage and got a really good cast together. But it's a very offbeat, strange kind of film. But I'm definitely going to have to rewatch it because it's been years since I've seen it. Again, this is a 133 disc. It does have a digital soundtrack that is surround encoded, and as you notice, it actually has the Ultra Stereo logo, which was, of course, the way to use matrix encoding and pay a lot less money because a lot of films couldn't afford the Dolby licensing. They would license the Ultra Stereo process, which did the same thing, just without the large fees of paying for Dolby Stereo. So it should decode just fine on your ProLogic systems and whatever receiver you're using. So again, just an interesting little offbeat film. Just keep in mind, I do believe this is still 133 for its transfer, but I think the DVD is pretty much the same too. I don't think this has gotten released in HD anywhere. Next up is the Fox Letterbox release of Hear No Evil. This is another blind buy for me that just looked interesting, and I figured why not. You get the Fox Letterbox banner across the top, and then the bottom has the logos and such, but isn't printed with the black bar, so they had dropped that. I'll show you the rear. And this is where Fox was finally changing up the rear artwork to get it away from the standard gray blocks like we're used to. I get some pretty nice liner notes and plot description, and it's very nicely laid out and looks very pleasing to the eye. You get a Dolby Surround encoded digital track and the letterbox transfer and no extras. So I'm going to have to spin this one up too. Next up is the Universal release of In the Name of the Father. I picked this one up sealed, and I've heard of this film, and I've just never gotten around to seeing it. And of course, Universal later released this with in a DTS version. But I don't think this film originally had a DTS track or anything, so I think the 2.0 Dolby Surround on here will do you just fine. Plus, this one will usually cost you $1 or less, whereas the DTS version will cost you maybe 50 times that. But pretty nice looking artwork, the way it lays out on the standard Universal letterbox jacket. I like the choice of red bars for everything to fit with the red of the title. Show you the rear. It's got a little bit of crush and ring wear because it was still sealed, but otherwise it's in perfect shape. Pretty nice imagery, well, not nice imagery, shall we say striking imagery chosen for the main background. And yeah, there's no trailer or anything, so it's just the film spread across 3 sides. So I'm going to have to check this one out. Next up is the film Malice, letterboxed release. Again, I've never seen this one either. The jacket just looked interesting, and so did the cast. So I figured, with these being as cheap as they are, and my weakness for titles on Laserdisc, I figured why not. Show you the rear. It's pressed by Image. It's technically a New Line and Castle Rock release. Has a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track and no trailer or anything, so just a movie-only disc. Have to check this one out. Next up is a very common title, but I finally found one in good shape. This one is still sealed. This is the Warner's letterbox release of the Pelican Brief, and very nice artwork. It's pretty much the film's original one sheet. It's perfectly laid out on a Laserdisc jacket. They've actually put the widescreen indicator on the bottom, on the front for a first, which is great. And I do still get a kick out of seeing, the original price stickers, the sale price sticker, and then what I eventually paid for it. So, which actually I think I didn't even pay that much. I think it was a store sale day, so it went from $40 to $36.99 to 99 cents to about 50 cents when I picked it up. And since it's 2 discs crammed in here, it does have a bit of ring wear, a little bit of creasing, but pretty much every copy of this or Warner's disc that you find are like that. Again, the rear is also very nicely laid out, a lot better than the common titles that Warner was still doing, and here they've finally gotten away from the bar up with the pictures along the side. No special features, unfortunately, but it does have a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, and of course the litter box transfer spread across 3 sides. So I'll have to spin this up and see how it looks compared to the DVD. It's also out on Blu-ray, which I think was a new HD master. Next up is another one I've never seen, but it just seemed appealing, sort of. This is the Universal Letterbox release of The Real McCoy. I picked this one up because I love Val Kilmer, I love Terrence Stamp, and I love what Russell McCalley did with The Shadow, so I figured I'd see some of his few other films from around this time period. You know, I guess this is the film's original poster artwork, and it wasn't very common for Universal to use pink on the letterbox bars, but you know, it looks pretty nice on the jacket. Show you the rear. Pretty much done in the typical style using a black background, but it works pretty well. No special features, just a single CLV disc with the Dolby Surround encoded digital track. So I'll have to spin this up and see how the picture is. Alright, next up is another Universal title I picked up for cheap, a film I've never seen. This is the letterbox release of the 1994 film The Cowboy Way, which admittedly looks a little goofy, but if any of these videos can attest to, I'm willing to go back and give most anything a try, especially when it's on a properly letterbox laserdisc with PCM sound, and especially since a lot of these films that, you know, you've either not seen in years or never heard of can be extraordinarily cheap, and I'm very cheap, so if a laserdisc is $1 or less, I really can't say no. But anyway, standard Universal letterbox jacket, nothing special or fancy on this one. Show you the rear. Just the movie only, not even a trailer or anything, but it has a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, so I'll have to spin this one through and check it out, although admittedly it just looks a bit silly, but you know, I hopefully it works, and I guess it's yet another variant on the formula that was, I guess, started by Coogan's Buff back in '68. So I'll give this one a shot. Next up is another common title. This is the Columbia Letterbox release of It Happened to You, which is essentially one of those rom-coms you've probably seen a chunk of on cable at some point or another. I know I have. I've never seen it all the way through, and this looked like a nice, simple release, and so it was dirt cheap. You can pick this up for literally nothing. It's very common. I didn't notice that it has this imprinted sticker on here, though, that advertises it as a new digital master with better picture quality. What exactly that means, and if there is indeed an older version or not, I don't know. But other than that, it's a pretty standard looking jacket, and I must say the image looks nice enough. So, and of course, this being a Sony disc, that means of course it could be from DADC Rot City, but I don't think this particular title has any issues with that. But as everybody pretty much very well knows by this point in time, if you've made it through all these videos, anytime you pick up a Sony Columbia title, you just never know. It could be Rot City, it could have a little bit of rot, as long as it's coming from the DADC plant, particularly the US one. The Austrian one really didn't have any issues. So, but it's a pretty nice jacket, very similar to a lot of other Columbia releases at this time. You do get some liner notes, and it's kind of printed small so I could fit more on here. And then it's just a single movie-only disc with no special features. But, you know, at least they put a little bit more into their, you know, non-gatefold jacket rears, and at least give you a little bit more to do and a little bit more in the visual department and some nice liner notes to kind of make it a little bit different. Of course, it carries a Dolby Surround encoded digital track. So I have to check this one out. And if anybody knows that if there was an earlier one, definitely comment and let me know. I didn't even realize that sticker was on there until I pulled it out to do this video. Next up is the letterbox release of The Madness of King George. Very nice looking cover image, and I've never seen this film all the way through either, so I figured this would be a nice way to watch it. Of course, it does have an AC3 5.1 Dolby track, and if my research indicates, if I remember correctly, I think this is one of the earlier Laserdiscs to have AC3, so it's not anywhere on the front, but it's tucked in right here with the older style Dolby Surround AC3 digital logo. It also carries a surround encoded PCM track, and it's just a movie-only disc with no special features, released via Image. But it's a pretty nice looking cover, and you can find it for very cheap. And I guess if you need a cheap AC3 demo disc, just to make sure that your demodulator's working, you can get this. Of course, it's been reissued on DVD, and I think it's out on Blu-ray, but I'm not for certain. But I figured this would be a good way to finally see it all the way through. Well, this is one I've been trying to get for a long time. I've only seen part of this, but it's very well known among Lucasfilm fans. This is, of course, the letterbox release of Radioland Murders, which was a film George Lucas tried to get made for years and years and years, and it finally was made and put out in 1994, and then just kind of quickly disappeared without any fanfare. But the concept has just always been fascinating to me, so I at least wanted to see it once. Of course, this being a Lucasfilm title, it of course practically demands that it gets the THX mastering stamp on there, even though this really isn't a film that quite needs one. And it is a universal disc, so it's in a standard universal jacket, but you wouldn't even notice the THX stamp if you weren't looking for it, but it is right there. The film carries a Dolby Surround encoded digital track, no AC3 or anything. Pretty standard rear and no special features, so I'll have to spin this one up. It's not gotten a Blu-ray release, and I believe it made it to DVD, and that's not very common, and the Laserdisc isn't very common, so it's just one of those that just kind of appeared, and hey, it's a Lucasfilm title, and then just disappeared. But you know, it does have its fans, and you know, it's certainly not a box office debacle like Howard the Duck was. But I've been wanting to see this for ages, so I'm really excited to have found this in good shape, still in the shrink wrap, and the art looks nice enough, so I'm going to have to fire this up and see for myself. Next up is the Warner Brothers release of Trial by Jury. This is a very nice copy, still sealed in the shrink. Of course, it's got a little bit of ring wear and such because Warner Brothers was still at this time using pretty thin cardboard, even though this is, I think it's just a single disc. Yeah, but it's nice enough looking cover art. I've never seen the film, but I've always been kind of a addict for, you know, old school style trial courtroom movies. And of course, this is letterbox. You get a nice letterbox banner across the front. This was the time where Warner Brothers finally decided to start saying, hey, you know what? We'll put widescreen logos on our widescreen Laserdisc releases because we're tired of playing games with people. Anyway, the rear's the more modern design. They've finally gotten rid of the colored block with photos on the side, so they've used the whole rear cover. And this presumably would have been the same on the tape and eventual, probably early snapper case DVD release if this got one. It has a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, no AC3. Warner Brothers was really kind of they didn't put AC3 on a lot of their films for a while. And of course, I don't know if this film was originally released with Dolby Digital. A lot of films, you know, it took a couple years before all films were mixed with 5.1 tracks available. Some films had 5.1 mixes made and just weren't released that way, or they had them made and most theaters weren't equipped for it, or went with DTS or SDDS. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff there. But Warner Brothers, for the most part, pretty much stuck with keeping Dolby Surround PCM tracks only for a while, and kind of kept that going for a couple years longer than some of the other studios. But pretty simple looking jacket, movie only release, and just a nice looking cheap title. All right, next up is one that is pretty common, and I know a lot of people talk about every once in a while. This is the Pioneer pressing of Congo, and it's an interesting looking cover. I know the film really doesn't have a good reputation and it's supposed to be a bit silly. I saw it once all the way through, but it was a long time ago. And I've kind of been meaning to go and look at all the other Michael Crichton adaptations. There's some I really like. Especially the ones he directed, like Westworld, and of course Great Train Robbery, which is fantastic. And then others like Rising Sun, which are just kind of, they could have been a lot better, but there's still a gem of a good idea in there maybe. And I've read a little bit of Crichton, and I've been meaning to read some more just to, see what all of his novels were like. So figured I'd pick this one up and revisit this. It does have a Dolby AC3 track, which is supposed to be pretty good, pretty nice, and it has a PCM matrix audio as well. Unfortunately, I picked this up and didn't realize that it's actually the pan and scan version. The widescreen one is also very common. I think it has a little widescreen banner across the top, but if you notice here, it has this film has been modified from its original version to fit your television. So you'll have to be very careful to not do that like I stupidly did. And it's very common to do that because a lot of these, you may think it was widescreen only and think, oh, it's no problem, and then come home to find you have yet another pan and scan disc you didn't want. So I'm going to have to replace this with the letterbox one, but I can at least check out the AC3 track with the Jerry Goldsmith score. But yeah, I've been meaning to revisit this for a while, and it was just one of those where I accidentally picked it up and got the pan and scan one, and now have to replace it with the letterbox one so then I can finally watch the film properly. Alright, here's the letterbox release of Don Juan DeMarco, which is yet another sort of indie film from the 90s that I've seen many, many years ago, and it's been a very long time, and I only remember small things about it. But it's a nice looking cover, I suppose, and still in the shrink wrap. It is the letterbox version. I don't think this one is too common. It's not rare or anything, but you don't see it practically everywhere. It's a letterbox 185 transfer released via Image. It's also got the New Line and American Zoetrope logos on it. It has a matrixed PCM track with a AC3 5.1 Dolby track as well, although I don't think this is going to have major discrete sound usage or anything. It's always nice to have that option if they were going to actually provide it, because even a lot of the major studios, like I mentioned about Warner Brothers a minute ago, still were not doing AC3 on all their releases. But anyway, it looks nice enough, and I'll have to rewatch this and see how the transfer is. Alright, next up is another film I've never seen, but it was dirt cheap, so I figured I'd pick it up. This is the Universal Letterbox release of The Hunted, and I have to say the only reason I actually picked this up is, as I said before, it was literally dirt cheap, and I am a big fan of John Lone in other films, so he really hasn't done a whole lot, at least not that I know of, in the film world for a good number of years. So I've been trying to see some of his other stuff, and so I figured that was well worth the 50 cents or so this cost. The jacket looks nice enough. I like how they kept everything red. I hate it when Universal would have the colored bar, the letterbox bars, be completely randomly different colors. And I suppose the image layout looks nice enough, although it does look pretty generic. Show you the rear. Looks nice enough, again, keeping with the red and black colors, and it looks nice enough. Of course, it's letterboxed with a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track and no trailer or anything, so I'll have to watch through this and see if it's any good. I feel like I'm being a bit of a broken record on a lot of these, but seeing as most Laserdisc titles you very commonly find are 90s titles, and a lot of them you've either not seen in a very long time or you've never seen it all. So since we're in that sort of era, I'm going to be repeating myself more and more and more. Next up is the letterbox release of Judge Dredd, the Stallone starring vehicle that admittedly is not really the character and is really more of a mid-90s sci-fi themed actioner. I've only seen part of this before, but some part of me wanted to see the rest of it for some reason. And this is a nice THX mastered letterbox Laserdisc with an AC3 track that you can get for very, very cheap. It's a very common title. And so I figured why not. And I know the later Dredd film is supposed to be much more accurate to the source. I've never really read any of the original Dredd stories, but I like some of the ideas in it. And even if a film doesn't quite work, that's, you know, a sci-fi themed from this era, I at least like to see it, because this is still primarily the pre-CG era where things were more grounded in practical effects and costuming and sets and so on and so forth. And, you know, action films that, you know, at least have something to them, even if they are a bit stupid and goofy, they can tickle the funny bone like nothing else. So the cover does look pretty nice, again, even if it is perhaps a little generic and probably was sized down for the VHS release. It looks pretty standard, but if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't realize that it does carry the THX stamp and has an AC3 track, in addition to the Dolby Surround PCM track. And it is letterbox, so I'm kind of interested to check out the transfer and see the picture quality and check out the AC3 track and see what that sounds like. So it's a pretty nice, very simple, straightforward disc. Of course, it has all the text at the bottom and the usual layout of a Disney disc because, of course, it's under the Hollywood imprint, which of course means this Laserdisc is Disney. And of course, to me, the dead giveaways are always the stereo with the bars running to the top and the bottom, and this version of the widescreen logo. That pretty much always is on every Disney Laserdisc, no matter what it is. So it is a Disney disc technically. So I have to check this one out. And again, it's very common. It's another AC3 title you can pick up for nothing if you're just looking for titles to test out your demodulator. Now, next up is the Paramount release of Nick of Time, letterbox, pressed by Pioneer. Nice looking cover artwork that replicates the original poster. And again, it's been a long time since I've seen this, but I remember it being very good. The cast is interesting, and the whole conceit is that the film runs in real time. So it really does have that ticking clock scenario down to a T. I think it's the central plot premise runs on a ticking clock, and then of course you have a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end that doesn't count. So in that way, it's like Fantastic Voyage, where once the Proteus is shrunk, then it has exactly 1 hour, and the film basically runs in sequence before the shrink ray starts to wear off. But anyway, it's a nice looking disc. You know, pretty straightforward, and again, the poster artwork is carried over onto the back rather nicely. No special features, no trailer, but it does have an AC3 5.1 track in addition to the PCM surround, so that should sound pretty nice. I'll have to check that out. But yeah, and I think this is an underrated 90s thriller, but it'll be interesting to go back and revisit it and check out the soundtracks and look at the picture quality. Next up is a really nice, pretty well-known Laserdisc. This is the THX certified letterbox release of Strange Days from Fox. And as you can see, they produced a beautiful jacket that uses the original poster imagery. It's kind of got a nice gloss to it, so this is very well done. It carries the Lightstorm Entertainment logo because this does still have some James Cameron influence. I'm not sure I forget what he's credited as, whether it's like executive producer or something, but that's why that's there. The gatefold is quite nice. Stylized imagery from the film, and then a little bit of text with your chapter notes. What's really nice about this is you get some cutscenes, deleted material, production material, in addition to a music video, and then a little bit of director commentary. So it's not quite a full-bore special edition, but this is definitely one of the more feature-laden regular movie-only discs out there. So that is quite nice. Now anyway, this one has a really nice rear cover. I like the design, the color, the layout, fits with the film beautifully. Of course, it's still got the Fox widescreen logo on there, but it's very classically done and looks much better than the old gray bars of the old releases. Now again, this does carry a Dolby AC3 track, which sounds outstanding. It has a Dolby Surround PCM track. And then the analog tracks have some of the director commentary and supplemental features. So like I said, this one really, I guess you could call it a special edition, even though it's not fully loaded like, say, GoldenEye is, but it's definitely one of the better feature-laden regular releases. And again, the transfer is great for the time. It also got a DTS release that should have a much stronger soundtrack, but of course that's very rare and expensive. And you can get the DVD, which pretty much ports this, but after that, I don't think it's come out on Blu-ray anywhere except I think maybe Germany or somewhere in Europe has a Blu-ray, but I don't think it's supposed to be that great or anything. So this is one of those titles that's kind of tied to Lightstorm and James Cameron and such that really hasn't seen a great HD release, the others being True Lies, The Abyss, so on and so forth. But it's really an interesting film with a lot of ideas that have been, done differently in other things. So I think it was a little bit ahead of its time and didn't really get the reception it quite deserved. So definitely highly recommended, with a great AC3 track and some nice features, and you can pick it up for nothing. Now next up is a title I'm sure a lot of you guys have. This is the standard letterbox release of 7. It's a little dinged up, but I wanted to pick this up for several reasons. The cover artwork is quite nice, I must admit, and replicates, I think, one of the original posters. I don't really think the covers for this get much better than this. Of course, there's the elaborate Criterion box set with all the gorgeous supplements and packaging and so on and so forth. But the transfer for that was done from one of the original low contrast bleach bypass prints that was made specially for the theatrical release. And then ever since then, starting on some of the later masters made for the later DVDs and the HD masters, every time they do those, they try and recreate the look or do something totally different. So nothing really has quite replicated the original bleach bypass look of the original release. And what that means is the silver is maintained. It's also referred to as a silver retention process or silver retention print, where you have extraordinarily deep blacks. Your color can be very vivid, and because that silver's still in there, it alters the look completely. And so it's not going to look like any normal print that would be made at the same time, even in the same lab. There was really kind of a resurgence of this technology, and then other developed versions by some of the other rival companies. And then there were different ways you could do it, so none of these would look the same. But this kind of sparked a interest in the process, and so a lot of films wound up using this for their theatrical runs throughout the mid to late 90s. And I've heard of a number of films doing that, and whether or not their video versions replicate this later on is really unknown. But anyway, this pretty much uses the same master as the Criterion, so if you're interested in seeing the bleach bypass print transfer that Criterion did, but without paying the heavy cost for the Criterion box set, you can pick up this very common, very cheap disc and just get a simple CLV version of that if you're really, really interested in seeing the difference. Another thing to note, I don't know how visible this is, but some of the words the killer lives by, shall we say, and in the film are actually imprinted onto here. And so if you look very, very carefully, there's lust, I think pride, sloth, and wrath are imprinted in there, which I didn't notice at first. You have to really kind of move it around in the light. Show you the rear. It's a pretty straightforward rear. Film makes it right over onto 3 sides, and those words are carried over onto the back. Here is gluttony, and envy is down there. And I think there's another one. Yeah, greed is right there. So you get the 7 deadly sins imprinted on the cover, which is a really nice touch that I didn't even notice until I really got it under the light. But it's a pretty standard looking rear, but it looks quite nice. And again, you do get a Dolby AC3 track, which sounds great and should be identical to the Criterion, in addition to a Dolby Surround PCM track. But of course, if you want all the extras and features, you'll have to get the Criterion version or one of many of the DVD or Blu-ray special editions. That's a really nice and important transfer to have. And you can pick this up for literally $1 or $2 versus the expense of tracking down the Criterion. Now here is another one I've never seen. I'm not really one for all of the SNL features, but this was with a lot of other discs, and I had to pick up the whole lot for 2 or 3 I really wanted. So I figured, this looks nice enough. It's a letterbox release, pressed by Pioneer. Stuart Saves His Family, based on the Gosh Darn It, People Like Me character from 90s SNL. So I figured, it'd be worth a shot. And it looks charming enough, I suppose, although your mileage can really vary with all of the various SNL features. But it's just a nice Paramount disc. No AC3, but it does have Dolby Surround, and no special features or anything, but should be nice to run through this. Now next up is the letterbox release of The Usual Suspects. Now I didn't think this would really be an important title to have, and I have the DVD with the special features and the Blu-ray, and but it wasn't until I realized that this was an indie film essentially when it came out, and I found out that it was originally mixed for Dolby Surround, so the 5.1 was a remix done later for video. The theatrical release wasn't Dolby Surround, so since this is a very cheap disc and I wanted to check that mix out and see if it was any different, especially since this is such a dialogue heavy film, I figured why not. So that's why I picked this up. Of course, it reuses the original artwork very well and gives you a nice widescreen banner on the top. The rear, I think, is really nice. It's very well done, very simple, and yeah, and it's from Polygram Home Video, which is why it looks a little bit different in the layout. Single disc, no special features, except for the analog track does have a commentary, which I think that's the same commentary that was carried over to the DVD. I don't think it was exclusive to this. But anyway, very nice, and it does have the Dolby Surround PCM, which is really why I wanted to pick this up. So if you've never seen the film, definitely do give it a shot. It is very good. But if you're interested like me in the sound design, you can pick this up for dirt cheap. Now, next up is it's a relatively common disc, but there are a couple reasons why I wanted to pick this up. This is the standard letterbox release of Waterworld from Universal. It uses the original poster artwork, and the jacket looks quite nice with the red, and I think the water and horizon of the imagery go well into the space background Universal always used. The reason I wanted to pick this up, I've always meant to see this all the way through. I've seen parts of it, and I know about the insanely troubled production. And of course, Arrow UK just came out with their big box set with the new HD scans of the theatrical cut and the television version, and then the super long version with tons of extras. But I just wanted to finally sit down and actually watch this. And on top of that, apparently the film only had a release with Dolby Surround SR in theaters, and then 4.0 surround. The DTS disc of this transfer, the DTS Laserdisc, apparently took the 4.0 theatrical master at the insistence of DTS, according to the Laserdisc database information, and DTS themselves remixed it into 5.1 for the Laserdisc. And then all the other DVDs and Blu-rays and such have a 5.1 track that is probably a different remix from that. But this one's supposed to have great audio, and until the Arrow release came out, all Universal had gone and done was put out outdated masters with DNR and sharpening and edge enhancement and such. And so I just wanted to see the theatrical version all the way through, and figured the Laserdisc was probably a good place to start. It's dirt cheap with a really great transfer for the time and really great original audio as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't have AC3 or anything, but that kind of makes sense. given that DTS had to remix it for their Laserdisc. So really excited to finally check this out. And again, if you haven't gotten it and you're a fan of the film, the new Arrow release is absolutely fantastic looking. Next up is the Warner Brothers letterbox release of the John Grisham adaptation, A Time to Kill. Nice looking imagery, and it has a nice gloss to it. And unfortunately, like every other Warner release, they use really thin cardboard, and there's 2 discs in here, so it's got a little bit of ring wear and creasing, but it's a lot better than most of the copies I've come across. This is a very common title. It is widescreen, although the logo is kind of obscured by the white grass of the bottom of the picture there. Show you the rear. The rear's pretty nice, although again it's pretty much sized for tape, with the side having your chapter index. No real special features, but again it's a nice, they spread it over under 3 sides and actually give you Dolby AC3 in addition to the Dolby Surround. But the reason why I wanted to pick this up, it's out on Blu-ray now, it's available on DVD and such, but with a number of Warner Brothers films I've noticed, and especially the ones directed by Joel Schumacher, most particularly Batman Forever, that the Dolby Surround tracks actually seem to have a better mix than the AC3 5.1 tracks that should technically be better in every way. And again, since this is a very heavy dialogue film, and I really, I like a number of Grisham novels, and I wanted to rewatch this at some point anyway. I figured pick up the Laserdisc and give it a comparison and see if it too has that, notable difference in the soundtracks. And of course, the Laserdisc is the only way to hear the old 2.0 surround tracks anymore most of the time. And even if they're on later releases, they're lossy encoded and usually don't sound anywhere as good. But again, it's a very common title. It's a good adaptation, although the novel has much more flavor to it, as pretty much all Grisham novels do compared to the eventual film versions that come later on. But out of those, it's solid, and it's definitely worth a watch once or twice maybe. But again, I just picked this up primarily to check the soundtracks, and because it's very common, it can be picked up for very cheap. Next up is the Paramount release of Eye for an Eye. It's letterbox, and this is getting later on in the Laserdisc format, so I've never seen this, but pretty much when you start getting to 95, 96, and especially 97 releases on Laserdisc, if they're cheap, I usually go ahead and pick them up just to check out the pressing quality and see how good the transfer looks, because you can be very surprised even by average pot boilers. If they come out later, they can look and sound fantastic on the format. But this looks pretty nice, and again, it was literally $1 or so. It has a Dolby AC3 track in addition to the Dolby Surround PCM. No special features or anything, but it looks like an interesting enough film, so I figured I'll give it a shot. The MGM UA release of Fled. This is another one where I've never actually seen the film, but this is getting later on in the era. It was a dirt cheap title. It has the original Dolby sticker still in the shrink wrap, so I couldn't resist. Again, being MGM UA, it has the MGM later style of letterbox bar across the top. I'll show you the rear, which looks quite nice. Much better design than a typical MGM letterbox release, although by this point in time they'd gotten much better, and their layout design, so on and so forth. And again, the Laserdisc itself was pressed and released by Image Entertainment. And in addition to the AC3 track, you get a PCM surround track, and you do get the theatrical trailer at the end. So I'm going to have to give this a watch and see if it's any good. Although at first glance, it just seems like a remake of the Defiant ones in the 90s. But anyway, should be pretty interesting, and I'm a sucker for anything with an AC3 track. Next up is the Columbia release of The Juror, a letterbox release. It was still in the shrink, and the cover art looks pretty nice. So, and I do like Alec Baldwin in most things, so I figured why not. Unfortunately, it is 2 discs and thin Warner-style cardboard, so it seems to be prone to getting dinged up and such. There's a little bit of ringware starting to poke through, but it's not terrible. Show you the rear, which, like most Columbia discs, give you a nice amount of liner notes, but you know, they're printed very small, so you kind of have to squint sometimes to read them properly. But at least they're there, and the imagery looks nice enough. You get your three-sided chapter notes here. The final side is CIV encoded, which is nice. It's letterbox with a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track. I don't think this has AC3, or if it does, it really doesn't note it, so I'm going to lean towards the it probably doesn't have it side. It does have that little new digital master logo here, I did notice, so I don't know why it would say new digital master when this was a brand new film just coming to disc, but anyhow, I guess they were just saying it's got a digital master, yay. So I'll have to watch this and you know, see if it's any good. And anytime I buy a Columbia disc, I try to look it up on my phone if I can and check the LDDB ROT listings. And this one doesn't really have any, I think. I think after a while, Sony realized there were some problems and maybe started using more of the Austrian plant, or fix some of the issues that were at the American DADC plant. But of course, you can still run into issues. You're always playing the ROT lottery. Next up is the Universal letterbox release of Sergeant Bilko, which I know wasn't very well received when it came out, of course, based on the classic character. But I have to admit, when I did see this, I thought it was, you know, charming enough and worked for what it was. So, and I do like Steve Martin, particularly in the earlier films that he made, and especially I like him as a dramatic actor. So I've been meaning to go back and revisit some of his other films, and I remember this one being better than its reputation, so I figured I'd give it a watch. It's a pretty common Laserdisc title, so you can pick it up for very little. The cover imagery is nice enough, and the rear is pretty straightforward. No AC3, just a Dolby Surround PCM track, so pretty straightforward and just in the typical Universal cover layout design. So I'll have to give this a rewatch. Now moving on to 1997 releases. This is the Sony Columbia release of As Good As It Gets, with the usual deluxe widescreen presentation banner across the top. Poster imagery on the Laserdisc jacket looks quite nice, and yeah, I have to admit it looks nice, and the Academy Award nomination blurb isn't too distracting. It fits in well. They put it in a good spot, so it looks pretty nice. Unfortunately, it's not a gatefold, so it's going to be very common to pick this up with a lot of dings and seam splits. Finally, they printed the liner notes in slightly bigger font on a lighter background, so they're much easier to read as opposed to most Columbia discs. You have your three sides of chapter notes here. Again, side 3 is nicely encoded in CAV. There is the Dolby Surround encoded PCM, and it does have a Dolby AC3 track. Although again, this is a relatively, you know, dialogue-heavy film. It's not really an action film, so I don't know how much mileage you'll get out of the AC3. But again, it's nice that it's there, and it does carry the digitally mastered moniker. So I'm interested to see what this looks like, because this is technically getting on into the era of later pressings and late releases, although I'd say 97 was really the last year where most of the majors were still releasing their own discs, although some had already started farming them out to Image primarily. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like, and again, I don't think this one has a lot of ROT issues, so you can feel pretty safe about picking this one up if you want to watch it on Laserdisc, at least as far as I know. Next up is another 97 release. This is the letterbox release of The Full Monty from Fox. Pretty straightforward, but nice enough looking cover image, and I haven't seen this in years, so I figured, hey, I'll just rewatch it on Laserdisc because I don't have enough already, do I? And again, you get the more modernized Fox widescreen logo with the searchlights. Show you the rear. It's a pretty nice rear, although the basic white backing kind of makes it look more like the old school gray backs of older Fox discs. It does carry a Dolby Surround PCM track, and it does have Dolby AC3, although for being, you know, more of a comedic drama, I don't know how much you're really going to need surround, but you know, you'd be surprised how much ambiance and effectiveness you can get even in a, you know, 2-room drama with a surround track. So that is if your mixer knows what they're doing. You get some decent liner notes, and the film's just on a single disc with no special features or anything. So the big benefit on this is the AC3 track and the fact that it's a later release. Next up is the Paramount release of In and Out, which I've never seen this film, but I've always kind of liked the starkness of the cover image. I think it really works, and it looks nice on the Laserdisc jacket. It's a very common title, and this one's still in the shrink, and I like the very generic laser sail sticker on it. Unfortunately, though, this doesn't have an AC3 track. I think the Japanese one is one of those where the Japanese release got AC3 and the US release didn't. And of course, the DVD has 5.1. The Laserdisc just has Dolby Surround PCM. So that is something to note if you're interested. Show you the rear. Again, I've never seen this one. I've meant to see it. I do like some of what Frank Oz has done in other films, so I've meant to see some of his other, some of the other films he directed. So this will be nice to watch through. I just wish it had AC3 just to, you know, give that a check and see what that's like. The disc itself is pressed by Pioneer, so and the rear jacket's pretty nice, so it should be interesting to watch. Just wish it had AC3. Next up is the letterbox release of Kiss the Girls. This is also from Paramount, also pressed by Pioneer, but thankfully this one does have AC3. The cover imagery is really nice, looks very striking, printed on the 12-inch Laserdisc jacket. This is a nice copy still in the shrink. Show you the rear. Unfortunately, it's got a little bit of ring wear, but that's to be expected after being, you know, kept in boxes and thrown around in the bins for so long. The rear cover also looks pretty nice. I like the background color and the orange for all of the photo edges in the chapter listing. No special features or anything, so the big draw is, again, this being a later release with Dolby AC3 in addition to the Dolby Surround track. And I don't think this one is very easy to find. I think it goes a little bit higher up in price. I don't think it's necessarily rare or anything, but anytime I can see especially a late 90s film with discrete sound on Laserdisc, I really like to give it a shot, because sometimes the soundtrack can be a bit different, or the picture transfer can be a little bit different, and you can really get, you know, what was reference quality back in the day. Like, for example, I really like the Mercury Rising Laserdisc, even though it's not a particularly very good film. It's got some interesting ideas in it, and the Laserdisc is great in both picture quality and sound quality, so I'll be interested to give this a shot. I've never seen the film, so. Now, here's a very interesting one that most Laserdisc enthusiasts have had quite a time with. This is, of course, the Columbia Sony letterbox release of Men in Black. And this is a notorious rotter title, and you'd think by this point in time they would have figured that stuff out and you wouldn't have to worry about rotted discs and stuff, but oh no, there's Men in Black for that. And there were apparently two different pressing runs. The first one, which was Rot City, and then the second one, which apparently was pressed by Pioneer. Now, I've gone through many versions trying to just get a clean copy. I just wanted to see what the transfer looked like and check out the soundtrack, but every time you try, you usually have a DADC rotted one. And so finally, I was able to get rid of my junky ones and finally get a nice Pioneer copy. The LDDB page will have the mint marks, and they also have some notes about trying to find correct copies, but I think you have to differentiate those by what size THX sticker is on it, and most of those have been thrown away along with the shrink wrap, so you pretty much have to just check the disc and check the mint marks itself and hope you have a non-rotted copy. Of course, it uses original poster imagery. Looks pretty nice, although it's not a gatefold, so it's prone to getting dinged up. This one's, got a little bit of creasing and such, but I don't mind, seeing as it's finally a non-rotted one. The rear jacket is pretty nice. I like the background usage of imagery from the headquarters base set of the film, and you get some really nice text notes, although seeing as they're printed in purple on a light background, they're not necessarily the easiest to read, but they're still legible. Your chapter stops are down here. The film makes it over onto, I think it makes it over onto 3 sides. No, I take that back. Side 1 is CLV, side 2 is CLV as well, and then let's see, where'd side 3 go? Yeah, side 3 itself is CAV. And as a bonus, you get the Will Smith music video that was made for the film. Does have Dolby AC3 in addition to Dolby Surround. It is THX mastered. You get the little logo here, and then here's the little Columbia Digital Master logo. I think this master got reused for the first DVD, and then that got spruced up and recycled over and over and over. And it wasn't until the mastered in 4K Blu-ray and then the eventual UHD release that we got a new master that looked more like the original release prints and less like video. But for the time, this Laserdisc and the first DVD, looked really great for the standards we had back then. So I'm interested to finally check this transfer out for a non-rotted disc and just see what it looks like. Again, it's not necessarily essential because you can get all the stuff that's on here on the later versions. This also has a Barry Sonnenfeld commentary on the analog tracks, which you can get on the DVDs and Blu-rays and such. But this is just one more for, I'm just curious to check out the transfer of a later special effects film from the 90s. It's just hard to find one that's not rotted. Next up is the 90s action thriller Turbulence. I've never seen this, but I'll try any 90s action film with an AC3 track. Again, it's a 97 film. It's pressed by Pioneer, and it's technically an HBO home video release, which they didn't really do too many of these big budget AC3 letterbox releases, so that should be interesting. Show you the rear. Rear jacket art is pretty nice, if a bit simplistic. No special features or anything, just a single CLV disc. Again, has AC3 in addition to a PCM Dolby Surround track. So I'll have to check this one out. Now next up, this one is a late release. It's a 1998 film that I believe came out on disc in, it should be late 98. So this is definitely a late release. This is the Warner's release of A Perfect Murder, letterboxed. Really nice looking imagery. This is the original poster. I love the color. The layout looks really nice, and it looks great on a Laserdisc jacket. This copy is in very nice shape. It's still in the shrink wrap. This is not a common disc at all because at this point, the Laserdisc were being pressed in very small batches, and I think this was also came out on DVD pretty early in that format. A lot of Warner Brothers late Laserdiscs were also early DVDs, so those would be much more common. Show you the rear. Again, it's pretty much sized for DVD and tape dimensions. Here you have your chapters. It's just 2 sides because the film's only on a single disc. It does carry Dolby Surround PCM, and it does have Dolby AC3 5.1. Additionally, it has a director and producer and director, producer, and star commentary. And it also includes an alternate ending with commentary available for that as well at the final chapter after the end credits. So it's a pretty nice disc, and of course it'll be really interesting to check out the transfer for being a late release. And it's nice to see that they also included commentary and an alternate ending, even though it's pretty much just a non-special edition. So nice to find and not common at all. Now, lastly, this is another uncommon, hard to find late release, but I was very happy to find it, even though it's a little bit dinged up. This is the, again, Warner Brothers letterbox release of U.S. Marshals, the sequel to The Fugitive that, it really doesn't have that great of a reputation, but I remember it being, at least, well made enough and pretty decent. Of course, it's in the usual Warner method of shoving multiple discs in a thinner style cardboard. So this has dings, seam splits on the top and the bottom and the side, and otherwise it's quite nice. It's got a glossy printing on the jacket. I was just happy to find this. It's a late release, and you don't find those every day. So, you know, I wish it was in better shape, but, you know, for the $1 I paid for it, I don't mind as much. Simply due to the rarity. Now, the rear jacket is pretty nice. It's much better laid out and using the entire width of a Laserdisc jacket. Your 3 sides of chapter notes are here. It includes the theatrical trailer for not only this film, but also the trailer for Cahill U.S. Marshal and Wyatt Earp, which that's kind of strange. I don't know why they put those on there, but okay. All right, Warner Brothers, I'll go with you, I guess. But anyway, it's letterbox with AC3, Dolby Surround PCM as well, and on the analog tracks you get a director commentary. So like Perfect Murder, they threw that on as well. So I do think, you know, if you come across this, definitely pick it up just to check out the picture transfer. Of course, you can very easily get the snapper case DVD that would have come out very early, which is probably the same master. But it's nice to always see a Laserdisc late release title and really check it out. Although I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think this particular title can have some rot issues. I don't think they're critical issues, and I may be wrong on that. Sometimes it's hard to remember these specifics. Of course, The Fugitive has tons of rot issues, and you really can't get one that doesn't have rot on it anywhere on some of the sides, and usually those get rotted to death. It's really the rare anamorphic widescreen promo version made later of that you have to go for if you want it on Laserdisc. This one, I think it has some rot possibilities, but it's really more of the rarity that keeps most people from having it. But just be forewarned, you're going to have to expect some split seams and such, because Warner Brothers still, right up to the end, insisted on cheaping out on their cardboard packaging. But that being said, it's got a nice gloss to the jacket, and the artwork and the layout looks quite nice, and it does have a director commentary with AC3. So it should be fun to give this a rewatch. All right, well, that's going to do it for the discs that have accumulated since I started this video series. I'm going to continue on a little bit later with any new pickups that I do, and sort of probably a monthly update video series to just kind of tack on with all of the extra odds and ends I pick up here and there. I'm really going to be probably a bit more selective with the ones I pick up from now on, and really just go for the ones I'm really interested in, or, you know, specific titles or titles from the classic Hollywood days, because that's where my forte really lies. But I definitely thank you guys for watching through these, and next I'll also do a basic setup video to just give you an idea of how I generally watch all of these hundreds of Laserdiscs that I have accumulated without really meaning to do so. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, and hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.